good afternoon and welcome to Tasting Group. Sabina, thank you for joining us again. You may recognise this familiar face today. He has hosted an amazing tasting as part of Cuoco today. We had a look at sort of a snapshot of history, an amazing travel back through time, a reference point for a lot of people. Vintages, you know, a few years old maybe.
Just a few.
Just a few.
About like a 60 years old or more.
Something that predates the existence of the entire New Zealand wine region as a whole, basically. So just gives you a bit of an idea as to how amazing this tasting has been. Today we've had a look at the wines of Antonio Ferrari, and in particular, there's sort of a really unique insight into not only old wines, but in the way that basically you can choose to restrict the output of wines. Incredibly rare, incredibly aged, and the brightness of the wines, incredible condition. Sabina, give us a bit of a sort of indication as to how Antonio Ferrari came about making his wines.
Josh, Antonio Ferrari has a very interesting story that goes more between my personal decision of running and hunting for wine from my region, from my land, which is Puglia, and finding out that in many years ago, like 1940s and 50s, in a period that usually we were thinking people escaping from Italy after the war and being pretty in a very miserable condition, there was someone called Antonio Ferrari thinking how to make the perfect wine from Puglia.
Yeah.
And in fact, we tasted today at the Prince Wine Store here in Melbourne 4 different vintages that they've been made just only once.
Yeah.
And it's a lineup of decades of history of winemaking, coming from a region that in the 40s and 50s no one was focusing on.
And I think that this is an incredible sort of, you talk about war, you talk about what a lot of people associate with Puglia, the kind of impoverished nature of it, but also just around Italy, recovering from that, because you do specialise in a lot of Pugliese wines, and this has got a sort of a bit of a double story going on as to how the wine is made.
Look, Antonio Ferrari is not a Pugliese, but probably he fell in love for Puglia, and in fact, as a winemaker, he used to go back to Puglia and visit his friend, the Baron Bardoscia. That was his surname.
Don't you wish you lived in a time when you still had barons? Like it's
Baron
great.
and dukes.
And
the Baron had a lot of lands cultivated with grapes and vines, and Antonio Ferrari used to go there and pick the grapes that he needed to bring it to Piemonte and make his own wine, his own way. And that was the era where there was no appellation.
Yeah.
There was, this is my wine, and that's how it is.
Exactly.
And that's how Antonio Ferrari as a character can be described. That's who I am, believe it or not, and accept it or not.
Yeah.
And so in the 49, he decided to, he was traveling in Puglia every year.
Yeah.
Every vintage. I used to go there and buy his grapes and bring it to Piemonte and blend it with Nebbiolo.
Yeah.
And do beautiful wines. But he started to pay respect and have a very good opinion about the region. And they start to be very sensible about what to do with the grapes and with the fruit of the region. He decided once in the 1949 to not blend the grapes from Puglia, the Primitivo grapes, with anything else.
Yeah. And
just come up with this first project wine called Il 49, the 49th of Antonio Ferrari.
And that's a wine that we had a look at today. We've looked at a 49, a 54,
and
a 59,
and a 78.
Yes. So, all of them predate me personally by a long time. But just to put that in perspective, when you can talk about not only barons, but you can talk about Italy that's only unified in the start of the 20th century, basically. And he's taking grapes from Puglia and bringing them up to Piemonte. It's an incredible, he would have gone through 2 or 3 different dialects just driving up.
Oh, I think that there are probably a few hundreds.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
If you consider there is a dialect every 7 kilometers, if you add that up, the maths will give you the result.
So you get just more than a few variables, but a story which is an insight, not only to tasting old wine, because that's what we love to do here on Tasting Group, but into history, into Italian culture, and that this is something invaluable. I mean, we've seen Domaine Huet, they have some certain age releases of 49s or 47s, I'm not sure of their Vouvray, but this here, an incredible story. Now, when you talk about we're talking about 4 different vintages here, that is all he's produced, is that correct?
We're talking about 4 vintages, and that's it.
It's just crazy.
So those 4 bottles you see here
yeah.
are the 4 bottles and 4 vintages ever produced.
And
so you will not see anything else.
Yeah, you won't see anything else. And I think that also the amazing thing about the quality of these particular wines is that whilst, and this is the unique kind of bottling thing going on, is that whilst they were 4 wines only and the vintages are incredibly old, they are bottled in 03, was most of them?
Well, they started bottling, that's a long story. Yes, they're very recent, in recent time, which at the moment is like 10 or 12 years ago. Now they start to decide, he started to decide when to bottle. In fact, Antonio Ferrari, we will be tasting at the moment. We'll be tasting in the moment the Solaria Ionica, which 1959, which is most famous and more Googled.
Practically not, but practically a World Heritage listed wine in terms of its rarity.
In fact, the Solaria Ionica, and that's what connects all the other 3 wines that he ever produced under one grapes of Puglia.
Yeah.
Well, it's a long journey, because whenever he decided to buy grapes from the plant, he used to make an agreement with the Barone Bardoscia and say, okay, I'll buy those grapes and I'll wait until I want to harvest them. Yeah. So he was always making a little bit of a statement in his decision, also with the Baron. Yeah. And he was a winemaker. Yeah. And Solaria Ionica was exactly like that, the story. Yeah. The story goes like this. Antonio Ferrari was in Puglia just before harvest, just a few weeks before, was summer. On a horse they used to go and visit different acreage of land, and he used to buy grapes on the plant and say, okay, I'll buy this, I'll buy that. And the Barone said, look, Antonio, I have a piece of land where the plants are very old and they're not producing that much grapes. Would you be interested in that? And Antonio was pretty sharp. He said, let's have a look at that. So
but they're a bit old, so we might need a bit of a discount. But
so his negotiation skills were very helpful.
A bit of poker face.
And they went to the vineyards, and they were here sitting several little trees of over 100 years old. Incredible. With beautiful little berries and just little bunches.
Incredible to think about at that particular time, considering phylloxera and everything that was going around the world. But just
And they had military bombardments and everyone coming through there, and those vines, they were still there producing grapes.
Incredible.
And that's exactly what happened there. They say, okay, I'll buy them, but I'll harvest exactly what I want. And that's where he slept a few weeks there in the vineyards, making sure that nothing was going to interfere with the ripe process of the grapes.
And of course, when you've got such old vines, they're going to be yielding a lot less. So you want to make sure that if they're very delicate, and you want to make sure that they're not going to be affected in any way. So he would have really been sleeping in the vineyards, making sure that everything's okay. And
suddenly he realized that there was a storm coming up from the south of the Mediterranean, from Africa. So they had this Sirocco perturbation, and in fact 1959 was one of the oldest, one of the hottest years and vintages ever recorded. Yeah. And so he decided to do the harvest just after a big wind of the sea, with all this salt and sea salt and sea breezes that set on the grapes. Yeah, yeah. And after that, after 3 days that the harvest happened, it came a big storm. Yeah. And he was already way gone making his wine in Gagliate in Piemonte. Awesome. Yeah. It was amazing. So he started to make wine in his vineyard, in his winery actually. Yeah. And the technique of cooling down the fermentation vats was simple as putting wet cloth from the river, from the Alps, onto the vats.
It's incredible.
And opening the door of the winery and just make some ventilation happen.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
everything is good.
Thousands of dollars
There
worth of refrigeration equipment no longer required.
That's it. So it was very self-sustainable, Antonio.
Yeah. Well, let's have a look at this as well, because this story is just incredible, and as we enjoy it, we can certainly relay a bit more of it to you. This is the Antonio Ferrari that we were talking about, Solaria Ionica. This is vintage 1959.
59. And there will be the only one.
Yeah, incredible.
Okay, so what we have here, Primitivo at this pure state.
Yeah.
Primitivo late harvest natural sweet wine.
Yeah.
But that's not a normal sweet wine.
No, absolutely not.
It's,
and I think that this is what we're talking about in terms of that contrast to usually if you look at a wine of this age, you would expect to see a dull reflection off the surface, but here you've got incredible brightness, and everything on the nose just indicates a wine that has both age but a subtle fruit core, which is just incredible given its age. It's got this like a roasted briar berries, blackberries, woody herbs. You know, it's kind of like that arrosto where you have the rosemary that's been sitting on the barbecue, and it's just, you know, really, really charred. And then you've got underneath that like a granitic schist, a white clay. It's just the amount of volume. It's turned up to 12. I mean, forget Spinal Tap and 11. This is going pretty loud. And
let's say that this has been now open for over an hour.
Yeah, so we had the wines during the tasting, and this has been open for a little while to kind of, you know, find its feet.
Waking up a bit. And something that I forgot to mention was that Antonio Ferrari decided not to bottle this wine for quite a while. And that means that once he made the wine in the 59, he aged it for 10 years in a big barrel.
Yeah.
And after that, you will think, okay,
Ready
probably
to
it's
go.
time to go.
Yeah.
No, he actually decided to make the wine resting into vitrified cement vat for over 60 years.
Yeah. If you think about Gen Y and a relative impatience about getting wines to market, this is the absolute opposite. It's like the grandson knocked on the door. He's like, Papa, when are we going to release the wine? He's like, oh, you asked me. You know what that means? Another 5 years.
Yeah, wait for another 5 years.
Incredible patience. And, you know, the palate, and I think that the sugar here in the wine, it's amazing because it's balanced. I was saying before, it's like a incredible sinewy tannin push. It's just really, really strong and voluptuous. And it's not often, usually you talk about Sauternes and the great dessert wines of the world as being balanced by acidity. But this one is balanced by the most ferocious tannin. It's like, you know, the Arnold Schwarzenegger of tannin. It's just really coming in there and dismantling.
In fact, the label is the original label that Antonio Ferrari...
Sorry, Sylvester Stallone of tannin. Sorry
of course.
Yeah.
Don't put it in German.
Anywhere near it. Yeah.
And you see the column, the Greek column, for once. On Italian wine.
Just on the front. And incredible little orange gradient sun, core of the sun kind of, you know, paint work on this.
It's so deep, the color, and so impenetrable. It's
it's probably might not be able to do justice, but it's got an incredibly. The core is like looking into an abyss, and on the outside there's some black coffee around it and some tawny hues. It's just really, really. The gradient is incredible, and the length in the wine speaks for itself. It's really kind of the sugar helps that, but geez, it's voluptuous and. It really finishes with roasted game, you know, a lot of cigar box and a lot of things that people talk about that you really, I mean, you read all about them in a lot of the British books, but once you get them, you're just like, click, bang, lock it away. Absolutely.
And I just noticed only now that we actually don't even have a spittoon.
Yeah, well, that was just completely not going to happen. You know, every so often. We might have put one here for artistic direction, but that just was not, you know, not going to happen.
Not the case.
Yeah, not the case. Yeah, there's incredible length, and in terms of what you can expect from these wines, this is a wine that you can learn a history lesson from, and I really do mean that. It's incredibly textured, and I think one of the beauties of Tasting Group is we can come to these wines and say like, well, you know what, it's dead in the glass because we're unbiased here, but I tell you right now, this wine has got just incredible vibrancy, and a wine that, you know, drink now? No, you could put this down. Like you could put this down for another 10, 15 years and you would come back to it and you would still see a wine that's going to age and looking really good. That sugar is going to help preserve it. And just a little kind of insight, Sabino, into the other wines that we have here today and we've tasted.
They basically, the Il 49, which is the 49,
that's
is a Primitivo as well, on 15% alcohol. As well, Primitivo is always the first grape to be harvested, hence the name.
Yeah.
And definitely was a pretty warm vintage there. But as we already saw in the tasting, the 49 is incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
The
incredible.
tannin structure and the perfume coming out of the glass are sensational.
And in case you're wondering, I mean, certainly just to convey a bit of what we tasted, the tannin in all the wines is incredibly different and incredibly unique. Definitely something that still sits in the wine when you could have expected in many other wines to have completely disappeared off the face. But it's got this back palate push, which is really unique. I've never seen that before in terms of this after effect, which not only would make it super duper for food, but is preserving a core of fruit on the front palate and the sweetness, which makes it a really well-rounded wine. Yeah.
And then, of course, going forward, we had the Barone 54, which is another Primitivo of the 54, and it was completely different. So why call it the same? It's a different wine, a different year, and that's what it was, a different project for that. To finish then with the 1978, which actually is my year when I was born.
How's that?
What a great year. In fact, that translated into such a fantastic wine, and everyone conveyed that 78 was pretty outstanding.
Yeah.
And that's the only one that actually doesn't have Primitivo in it, and that's a Salice Salentino. Classic.
Yeah.
From
And
Puglia.
I just love the fact that we're looking at 4 wines here, and if you talk about, this is my reserve wine, it's like, so did you make 4 wines, and how long did you make 4 wines in? Oh, okay, so they're all super reserve? Oh, you didn't write reserve on the label, really? Oh, okay, how about that?
There's just one. And so the Salice Salentino at the end is the La Canestra, and that is Negromaro.
Yeah.
Negromaro, another red, rich variety from my region, and that's Negromaro 80% with 20% of Malvasia Nera.
Yeah.
And is surprisingly elegant and beautiful and just very, very pretty.
Yeah.
And it's only 1978.
Yeah, and I think that this sort of the treatment that they've received certainly provides a more evenly. The tannin throughout the wines is quite consistent. I'm just absolutely gobsmacked by the tannin in this Solario Ionica. It is just something different, completely something different. You know, you talk about all the kind of the ports of the world, and they're their own sort of stories. But this is a really unique insight. And what can I say? You know, get out there and taste them because we're getting a history lesson here. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Hopefully you'll be able to find them somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Josefina, for being able to open the doors to these sort of wines for us because they're really unique and they really do inform a new world country, the young punks of the wine industry, a little bit about, hey, you know, you want to learn something about history? You know, it's like it's the easiest thing without having a grandfather that's 150 years old to tell you about it.
So,
yeah, thank you very much, Sabina.
When should we open another one?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, well, if we're anything to go by the permission of Antonio Ferrari and his estate, then probably not for at least another 20 years. Until next time, thanks for joining us here at Prince Wine Store. It's been a pleasure.